Hello, my name is Tara Brabazon and I'm the Dean of Graduate Research at Flinders University, and welcome to vlog 106, Creative Industries. The vlog this week is part of a trilogy that I'm presenting for you about the interesting tropes, phrases, policies and ideas that might enable and support different working environments for our PhD students. And look, the creative industries, complicated phrase, intricate series of policies. I've taught the creative industries to students and disciplines around the world for the last 18 years. But I do have something to say today, because this is an area where Australia is a long, long way behind, and it is impacting strongly on our economic environment, our social environment, and the working potential of our students. So I do have something to say, and I'm going to go for it. But as always in this vlog, I'll define it for you. So a very simple, straightforward guide. What are the creative industries? So you can use the phrase with some currency and integrity. But I'll also express and show its strengths, its profound weaknesses, and its challenges. Okay, so let's do this. And let's start with, what are the creative industries? Right, well, they are a series of policies, practices and behaviours that enable the commodification of ideas. So the creative industries are not about creativity. They are about the commodification of creativity. The creative industries actively critiques the notion of high culture, the arts, as being of intrinsic value. Instead, it focuses on the economic potential and the economic value of these industries. Now, the critique of high culture, the critique of the arts really matters here. What's happened, particularly in the last 180 to 200 years, is particular groups have claimed their culture, their practices, their behaviours, their languages, their art as being better than other groups. So, for example, particularly in the 19th century, the middle classes tried to affirm English literature, the canon, as being of intrinsic worth, enabling and ennobling. And they were arguing that English literature, the canon, was better than popular literature, which was dismissed as trash. So classical music was better than popular music. And of course, these systems, these categories are completely arbitrary. There is nothing in opera that makes it better than death metal. There is nothing in Beethoven that makes it any better than trance. Full stop. So what creates this hierarchy of value is the master narratives that exist. So the master narrative of class or race or religion or gender or nation. So these narratives about Englishness, Britishness, Australianness serve to ensure that particular cultures and behaviours and arts are seen to be intrinsically better than others. Okay. So in the 19th century, particular cultural practices were seen to be intrinsically of value. And of course, English culture in particular was used to colonise the planet and say that the English were better than everybody else. So not. But we see the clustering of these ideas in a guy by the name of Matthew Arnold. Now, Matthew Arnold wrote a book in 1869 titled Culture and Anarchy. What a great title. Think about it. Culture and Anarchy. So what was he trying to argue? What was he arguing against? Well, during the period that he was writing this book, the working classes started to behave badly. The Industrial Revolution was tough, was very hard on people, tough working conditions, tough housing conditions, tough health conditions. And what was occurring is that the working classes were starting to demand more rights to understand their own existence, their own consciousness, and to create change. But what is particularly great is the working class started to claim the right of leisure. So what they did outside of their working day, and often involved drinking a great deal, listening to music, dancing, having a great time. If you're working that hard, you have a right to maybe have a gin and have a bit of a dance, rock and roll. Now, what Arnold tried to demonstrate is that actually the working class shouldn't be doing this, and they should be enlivening their existence through middle class culture. So listening to good music, reading good literature, Now, of course, this was a demonstration of how particular cultural practices were being used to control the working class. Good culture was a way to control the masses. So you can see the meaning of that title there, culture and anarchy. Middle class culture was trying to control working class anarchy. So, to this day, whenever you hear someone talk about the intrinsic value of high culture or the arts as ennobling, as enlivening, you start to know where this ideology has come from, okay? Whenever anybody says this particular thing is intrinsically of value without understanding context, you know what they're trying to do. They're trying to control you. So high culture in the 19th century, really to the 20th and the 21st, high culture was the opiate to stop the working class from A, having a good time, and B, perhaps starting a revolution. So therefore, the creative industries was powerful here because it was a way to critique high culture, critique the arts as being of intrinsic value. And can I say the other second crucial critique, really important, is the creative industries were a critique of the separation between the arts and the sciences. Now, this is where Australia is a long way behind the rest of the world, and I'm being really honest here. When Steve and I returned from the United Kingdom to Australia, we sort of had a bit of a culture shock for a couple of years. And one of the great culture shocks we had was this incredible separation of here's the sciences and here's the arts, and they don't mix. Now, Steve and I have based our lives and our careers on believing in clever people doing interesting work, exploring a series of interesting ideas through the disciplines, and actually we all gain. Knowledge improves if we bring the disciplines together. The problem is in Australia, that ideology just doesn't exist. There's a separation of the sciences and the arts. Now, this is just nonsense, to be honest with you, and the creative industries at their best start to blur these categories. So it looks at, for example, digital imaging software for mining companies, great example, or the role of technology in enabling consumer choices when they're thinking through food production and consumption. There are hundreds, thousands of examples of real problems in the real world where a multidisciplinary arts and science solution is required. So before I give you that final clear definition of the creative industries, I just want you to remember that it's founded on dismissing the notion that some art is of greater value than others and dismissing the binary of the arts versus the sciences. So that's the foundation through which the creative industries progress. And particularly considering the very complicated challenges confronting the South Australian economy at the moment, you might be able to see the incredible value of the creative industries if we do this properly. So the notion of the creative industries emerged in the United Kingdom under the Prime Ministership of Tony Blair. Now, why this is important, why Britain and why Blair? The answer, team, was desperation. Britain was the first industrial nation. But in the 19th century, Britain was not only the home of a mighty empire, but the first nation on this planet to undergo an industrial revolution. So the economy, industry became more productive and more efficient. And that meant that social and economic structures also started to warp through the speed of the change. But through the 20th century, the fighting of two world wars took their toll, and other nations, particularly Germany and France, caught up to Britain very, very quickly. Now, by the 1960s, Great Britain had really become Little England, one little power place in a pretty powerful Europe. And you can see, therefore, the whole Brexit problem. It's like, really, Great Britain, you think you're going there again? Knock yourself out. Good luck with that. So Tony Blair became Prime Minister in 1997. And he was confronting a whole series of profound economic problems. Economic growth was static, and it was highly regional. So the economy in the south, particularly fueled by London, was okay. So finance capitalism was doing well, real estate capitalism was doing well at that point. The south was okay, but the north, Wales, Scotland were basically industrial wastelands. So Tony Blair did one clever thing. He did a lot of really bad things, can I say, but he did one really clever thing. He realised that Britain was the first industrial nation, and therefore it would have to be the first post-industrial nation. He recognised that new engines for economic growth needed to be found. And perhaps his most revelatory change, that seemed incredibly small at the time, was changing the name of a department. The Department of National Heritage, which sort of ran buildings and so forth, ran heritage. He changed it to the Department of Culture, Media and Sport. And this name change happened in July 1997. So the British economy needed a radical change. The industrial sector, manufacturing and mining were destroyed through the 1980s, and there needed to be a shift in thinking. There needed to be a shift in policy. So the goal suddenly was to start building relationships between industries, particularly sport and particularly tourism. So now you've got a sense of the historical justification of this movement and this momentum, and perhaps its value particularly for South Australia, and you can see where we're going to be going now. So I'm going to put in some basic definitions of the creative industries that you can use and you can hold on to. Now remember, there's a lot of definitions in the world at the moment. Creative industries does have different manifestations and applications in different countries. How it's used in Wellington and Aotearoa, New Zealand is very different from how it's used in Manchester in the UK. But the policies around the creative industries, what does hold them together is that they are a way, if you will, to map and manage the changes to the global economy that include globalisation, obviously, digitisation, the increased rate and proportion of a population that is tertiary educated, the rise of intellectual property rights, the rise of copyright, and the changing relationship between work and leisure. So I also want you to have a little bit of awareness that there are three phrases that unfortunately in Australia overlap far too much and create confusion. And actually these are three very different models of thinking about media, economics and the arts. And they are creative arts, cultural policy and creative industries. Now they are the three models, creative arts, cultural industries and creative industries, that have basically dominated our understanding of economics and the media and the arts in the last 100 years or so. Now I'm presenting it as a linear model, but please recognise that all three terms are used right now. In fact, at Flinders University right now, there is a creative arts program. So all three, even though they're historical terms, are used in the present. Now, the creative arts was a phrase that particularly gained currency in the 1950s that described not only a type of art, high art, but also a type of funding arrangement, a way of judging, a way of valuing culture. So since the 1950s, the creative arts model promoted arts for art's sake and has created a particular way of funding art and the arts by government. So what happens in this model, the creative arts model, is that the government put aside a particular bit of money for the arts, particularly for literature, classical music, ballet and so forth. So money is distributed to individuals in the form of grants, and there's no sense that there's going to be any economic return from that grant. So money is given to individuals to produce quality art. No sense of economic return, and those arts are funded because they're supposedly uplifting for humanity, because they're supposedly quality. So as you can see, all that stuff we talked about at the start of this vlog about those 19th century divisions of high culture and low culture, high culture and popular culture are suddenly back with us. So the middle class trying to protect and preserve high quality culture away from what the working class appear to be doing at a particular time. So art is meant to improve people, not be the basis of economic growth. So needless to say, this is a very conservative way of organising culture. And when I use conservative, I simply mean reinforcing the status quo, the traditional notions of what is art, what is culture. So individuals are funded, not infrastructure, and that's important too. So this model existed really quite powerfully from the 1950s, but it started to reach a critique through the 1980s with the cultural industries model. Cultural industries model, 1980s. Now, intriguingly, Australia was actually ahead of the game with the cultural industries model. The Hawke Labor government really enabled this model with great effectiveness. We were also really helped, I think, so a wonderful academic, a British academic, moved to Australia at this time, Tony Bennett, and he helped us all think about this new model of thinking about national culture. So the cultural industries model, think 1980s, think Bob Hawke. So the goal was to build a strong national culture. So if you like, the culture and the arts became the advertising or the branding arm of the nation. So cultural industries policies were particularly used to build up the Australian film industry. So Gallipoli, Crocodile Dundee at this time, advertising for the nation. But as you can see, this is also a pretty conservative way of organising the arts because it's reinforcing a very traditional, reified and simple notion of what it is to be an Australian. So Gallipoli and Croc Dundee are two great examples of that. They do advertise the nation, but is that what we want to be advertising? Question mark. Also in this cultural industries model, it is a way to provide block grant, big bits of money to museums, to galleries, to ballets, to also community arts organisations so that they can run their own budgets in the small to medium term. Okay, so there's those two models, right? Now we're entering the creative industries model. Now, this is a loan model. It's not a grant model. So money is loaned from a government to small and medium-sized enterprises so that they can build up the profit within their own organisation. So the aim is to build businesses in and around the creative industries, using culture, media, arts, sports, tourism as the driver for economic development. So as you can see, we've got a different sort of value being deployed here. Not artistic value, economic value. But the Australian creative industries, I'm going to critique this, right? I'm going to present it neutrally and then I'm going to immediately critique it. So the Australian creative industries last year was valued at $32.8 billion. Billion dollars to our economy. Okay, so once a year this big ticket item comes, or billions of dollars come from the creative industries. It's very difficult to measure the economic value of the creative industries, all right, because it includes software development and design, the gaming industries, it also includes sports and tourism. So it's a very woolly series of definitions. So when anyone offers an economic figure like that, you've really got to critique it, because what is included in the creative industries is up to debate as well. But why it is important, and I think this will be significant when we do our vlog next week as well, these industries matter because they're significant in terms of development. Because they're service-oriented industries, there are a lot of workers in them. And that's going to be important when we deal with the fourth industrial revolution next week. So what I think makes the creative industries really important and structurally different from creative arts and cultural industries is that it builds relationships between industries. It builds relationships between sectors. And this is what I've described for about the last 18 years as the horizontal integration of industries. The horizontal integration of industries. So creative arts, cultural industries have that sort of vertical relationship. The government has funding and they either give it to individuals or give it to organisations. So it's a vertical series of relationships. Now, creative industries is different. And let me just give you two really easy examples to show you how this horizontal integration of creative industries operates. And it comes from my work, so I've done this, right? So here is my book, Digital Wine, that I wrote with the wonderful Mick Winter bless you Mick, and also Bryn Gandy in Aotearoa, New Zealand. Hi Bryn. Now our goal here was to try and find strategies where new wine regions and new wine makers could use the capacity of digitisation to market and brand their work, particularly through QR codes. But what we were trying to do is we were interested in primary industries, viticulture at this point, but showing the capacity for wider food-related industries, but to show what digitisation can do for viticulture and also wider regional development and branding. So as you can see, deploying digitisation to create new audiences and new sales. Horizontal integration of industries. All right, another example. My other book, Playing on the Periphery. I love this book. This book explored particularly the relationship between sports and tourism, how we build up sport tourism with attention to sport museum, but also sports photography and sports media, right? Particularly for regional development. It was focusing particularly on small and medium-sized towns and how they can enable sports tourism. So economic development was emerging from already existing industries by building the relationships between them. Okay. Two examples, straightforward examples. So this type of approach has many mothers and many fathers in the literature. There's lots of different scholars I could use to really help you think about the application of this in your own work. But there's one guy I'm going to use, Charles Ledbetter. This guy was the consultant for Tony Blair, and he's written, if you follow his career through, I own everything, I've read everything he's ever written. Fascinating. I disagree with a lot of it, but it is provocatively interesting. So Charles Ledbetter is an interesting scholar for some of you to follow. And where creative industries really in so many ways was at its most resolute and powerful was in this book, Living on Thin Air. Think about that title, Living on Thin Air. He argued that the entire economy was changing. This was a knowledge-driven economy. So where this is significant, and you'll see the critique of, inverted commas, science isolated from the rest of academic life, he argued that innovation was not fired by science alone, but by a multiple series of sources of innovation and competitive advantage. So the sources of innovation and competitive advantage came from three areas: design, branding, and skill development. Design, branding, and skill development. They could exist in the sciences, they could exist in the humanities, they can exist everywhere. These factors are at work in all industries, not just, say, software and hardware design. And this is the key. The creative industries do not separate the arts from the rest of the economy. So agriculture and mining, as much as music and fashion industries, are involved in skill development, branding, and design. So the new economy is not about the creation of ideas, but about the commodification of ideas. Not the creation of ideas, the commodification of ideas. And I'm going to use the famous chocolate cake example. This might change your life besides making you feel a bit hungry. But Charles Ledbetter made the following point, quote, "Think about the world as divided between chocolate cakes and chocolate cake recipes. A chocolate cake is what economists describe as a rival good. If I eat it, you cannot. A chocolate cake is like most products of the industrial age. Cars, houses, computers, personal stereos. The chocolate cake recipe is like the product of many items in the knowledge economy. Software, digital codes, and genetic information are all like powerful recipes. We are moving into an economy where the greatest value is in the recipes and not the cake." End of quote. So the argument here is clear. The chocolate cake can be sold only once, but the recipe can be commodified and sold over and over again. So this is what is valuable to you as a PhD student. The research, the ideas, the models, the modelings, the theories that you configure can be sold over and over again. So as you can see, intellectual property rights and copyright are where the money is to be made. And this is an issue of law, not creativity. So what I've presented in the vlog this week, I hope feels a little bit inspiring for PhD students. Here is a new way of thinking about economics that's about the valuing of ideas, the valuing of the work, the intellectual work that clever people do. It validates the brilliant people and the ideas they create. And the money flows through IP, through copyright, through patents, sort of, to brilliant people. And that, of course, is where we start to get to the critique. And we'll finish off with the dark underside of this, really. Not all is well in the creative industries paradigm, because working in this new economic order is, of course, incredibly ruthless. Most creative industries are staffed by part-time, casual and contract staff. This is often described as the portfolio career. Good luck with that. But these occupations are based on getting the next gig, the next contract, the next job. This type of economy is also described as enterprise culture. You have to be enterprising to get on. So in our supposed new economy, there's a lot of the old economy within it about unemployment, underemployment, insider trading, and yes, poverty. But you as a PhD student, you do gain from these ideas. And so the two final messages, the take-home messages I want to give you as wonderful, astounding PhD students and how the creative industries can help you, let's do this, are as follows. Okay, firstly, remember Charles Ledbetter, Living on Thin Air. Remember this guy. And keep focusing on branding, skill development and design. Branding, skill development and design. Focus on those three for yourself and think about the trajectory and the career of the ideas you are creating. What skills do you hold? How are you branding up your research? How can your ideas be commodified through design? And secondly, and this is the key creative industries lesson that transformed my life. I have made my consultancy money through this single idea, and that is the horizontal integration of creative industries. Don't stay locked into your little project. Don't stay locked into your particular discipline. Think about how your ideas move. Think about how they can be translated into other industries, other cities, other regions. Think about applications. How does your research translate into different industries? How do you render your ideas mobile and also render your ideas into a commodity? Thank you for hanging with me. Thank you for listening to The Creative Industries, and I wish you all love, light and peace. Tea out.